All right, so this video is intended to talk about how using this method can help you to achieve pregnancy. And this is true for women who are dealing with infertility. It's possible that you just have not been timing it right. You know, maybe you've had it in your head, like I did with my second child, that if I have sex on day 14, I'm going to get pregnant. And if not, something's wrong. That's not true. You may always ovulate like on day 16 or later. And so you need to know what's normal for your body. You need to figure out if your body is doing a regular cycle. You need to figure out if you're having anovulatory cycles often, or if you've got something going on like endometriosis or PCOS, which we talked about a little bit in the health videos, and a lot of clues that can clue you in to whether or not that's what you have going on. So if you're trying to conceive naturally, this is an amazing place to start. This is, I think, the place that every infertility doctor should be having their patients start. Start by tracking your cycle. Start by figuring out what do we actually have going on here, and go from there. So in the birth control video, we talked about how to avoid pregnancy, you have to avoid all of those days where you have cervical fluid. Now, when you're trying to achieve pregnancy, it's the opposite. You have to have sexual activity on those days where you have cervical fluid. So I'm gonna go back to this chart, the chart that you practiced on. This is mine, it's, nicely printed off for me already, but the chart that you practiced on where we did the temperatures and we drew the cover line, we're gonna go back, and on your chart, this one's a little bit different than the one. If you're coaching with me, I've sent you a PDF file of a chart to print off and use, and that's the one we practiced on back when we did temperatures. So a part that I neglected and skipped over when we were doing cervical fluid was how to chart cervical fluid. So that's something that's going to be really important when you're either trying to use this as birth control or you're trying to use it to achieve pregnancy. That's going to be something that is super important to keep track of, just to help you remember, like, how many days have I had this? What was it this day? Is it building? Is it building and then dropping and building and dropping? Tracking your cervical fluid is the most important part of this method. So really quick, go back to that chart that I've sent you, the PDF file, and look down below the temperatures, where we charted the temperatures. You're going to see a line for intercourse. You're going to circle the days that you had intercourse, just to help you remember, like, if you do achieve pregnancy, it's helpful to go back and look. Your doctor may ask, do you know what day you conceived? What days did this happen? If you're trying to achieve pregnancy and it's not happening, that may be a clue as to timing, or even for your doctor, if everything looks normal or doesn't look normal, being able to say, this is when I engaged in sexual activity, is going to clue them into, is something wrong. So underneath that, you'll see the words egg white, creamy, and then you're going to have period, spotting, dry, or sticky. So if you're on your period, you're just going to put a dot there. You're going to exit out or whatever, a mark or a P for period, some way, days. For example, you had a 6-day period. For those 6 days, you're just going to put a P where it says period, spotting, dry, or sticky. And then if it's dry days 8 through 10, you're going to put a D there for dry. Then if it starts to get sticky on day 12 or 11, you're going to put an S for sticky, or put a dot or whatever. Some way you're going to mark that differently, whatever helps you remember that this is what was happening with your cervical fluid. You're going to mark that under the cycle day that it was. Whenever it goes up and it's creamy, you're going to mark that on the cycle day. Or egg white, especially important to note that. Or even egg white could also be translated as like a lubricative vaginal sensation. You're going to mark that on the correct cycle day. Okay, so when you're trying to achieve pregnancy, it's important to remember that sperm can live for 3 to 5 days in fertile cervical fluid. Now, if you recall, we go back to that whole cycle graphic You're going to refer back to this. The fertile phase ideally is 4 to 8 days. Acceptably, it can be 1 to 10 days. So when we think about that, sperm can only live for 3 to 5 days in a fertile cervical fluid. So what if you have an 8-day fertile phase, but you had intercourse back on day 1 of your fertile cervical fluid? Is it going to live till the day you ovulate? Because ovulation would be day 8. No, it's not. So you have to say it's going to, because you don't know how long your fertile phase is going to be. Does that make sense? Your fertile phase is not going to be the same every cycle. It's not going to be consistent. You might start to notice a pattern and notice what's normal for you, but that's not something you can rely on. So anytime that you have fertile cervical fluid is when you would engage in sexual activity to achieve pregnancy. Your optimal time is when you're going to see that egg white consistency. It's going to be clear, watery, slippery, stretchy, that lubricative feeling. That's your ideal time to achieve pregnancy.